After a quickie marriage with the old-fashioned Professor Calvin, he remained reserved and disciplined. I boldly declared while drunk that I would bed him in 3 days. Even if it didn't happen, I'd accept it. Little did I know he caught me saying that. That night, the usually composed man lost control, his tie coiling round my wrist, his voice husky. "You're quite feisty now, aren't you?" When Calvin found me at the bar, I was staring fixedly at the male model dancing on the stage. Sandy, beside me, panicking, stopped me from pouring more drinks, fearing I might mistake him and get myself into trouble. "Joy, Calvin's almost here, no time for flirting with guys." Maybe it was Calvin triggering some instinct. I turned red and glanced away slowly. No one was as good-looking as Calvin. The male model had broad shoulders, long legs, and a slim waist. He did bear a slight resemblance to Calvin in the face, making it easy to mistake them. In Sandy's disbelieving eyes, I blinked slowly. "His waist is not as slim as Calvin's." Sandy silently squealed and shook my shoulders gently, full of excitement she thought I knew about. Suddenly, she lowered her voice. "Didn't you say he couldn't perform?" An hour ago, I had called Sandy, using the excuse of disharmony in my marriage, and persuaded her to meet me. After a few drinks, I gathered the courage to talk about my cohabitation with Calvin. I counted on my fingers. Great dressing, cooks well, does all the housework, and has a strong physique. As I spoke, feelings of grievance flooded my heart. "But he refuses to sleep with me." Pouring out my grievances in one go, Sandy comforted me, patting my back sympathetically. "I get you, in your younger and fierier days." Finishing her sentence, her expression slightly changed, as if she had guessed something, cautiously asking, "Do you think Calvin might be not up to it?" Men usually have this sensitive issue that's hard to talk about. Slow to catch on, I suddenly realized what "not up to it" meant, like being struck by lightning. My whole body shuddered, and my mind erupted with thunderous thoughts. After a long silence, fueled by the alcohol in my stomach morphing into a head-spinning drunkenness, the alcohol overwhelmed reason. As if challenged by the daunting problem in front of me, I slammed the table and stood up. "Just Calvin, I'll have him in 3 days." Slowly recalling Sandy's words, after some shallow calculation and weighing things in my befuddled mind, I sighed, "Even if it doesn't work out, I'll accept it." In the clamor of the music, my ambitious declaration rang out crystal clear. Even the male model turned to look at me, playfully whistling in my direction. The atmosphere of the night ignited at that moment. Even though drunk, I could still tell who smelled better between Calvin and the male model. I shook my dizzy head and sat down without a sidelong glance, ignoring Sandy's frantic eye signals. I just wondered why she suddenly sat up straight, as if facing a formidable opponent. Joy. With the mellifluous voice, a pair of hands precisely held onto my back. In an instant, a tingling sensation spread from my earlobes to the back of my head. Clearly, Calvin had rushed from the school. His deep dark shirt cuffs half rolled up, the top 2 buttons undone, the collar slightly open, revealing his Adam's apple, and a patch of cold white skin. Even in the dim bar light, his features were still captivating. Unreachable and exquisite. Our gazes briefly met, and Calvin nodded slightly. Then, his suit jacket, imbued with a light masculine scent, enveloped me snugly. Rather than touching me directly, he leaned towards my ear, asking softly, "Can you walk on your own? Or should I carry you?" This manner of distant politeness created a sense of intimacy without being too close. Something bit my heart, and I made a sound of uncertainty. My earlier boastful attitude softened in front of Calvin. Like molten sugar, flowing with a sour-sweet juice from within, he immersed me thoroughly. Before leaving, Joy gave me a look that seemed to say good luck. But my groggy mind couldn't grasp the deeper meaning. I wrapped my arms around Calvin's neck, nestling myself into his embrace, revealing only half of my flushed face due to intoxication. In the intimate entwining shadows under the streetlights, he held me securely, but I felt his heartbeat near my ears getting louder and more erratic, impossible to ignore. Just before Calvin spoke, I raised my face in confusion. The tipsy speech slurred. "Is it me? My heart is racing. But I really didn't plan to kiss you." Calvin chuckled indulgently. Joy, did you want to kiss me? Finally finding a clue amid my muddled thoughts, I nodded affirmatively. I got it now. Grasping Calvin's hand on his waist, tracing the curve of his waistline and lower abdomen, I inched upwards. Listen, is your heart racing here too fast? It felt like landing on a melted cotton candy, brushing against a spark. Calvin's fingertips slightly curled, his voice hoarse. Here. I bit my lip. In my mind, fireworks seemed to explode one after another. Gripping his sleeve tightly, twisting and loosening, my eyes misted over with a thin layer of mist. I can't. Calvin paused for a moment, withdrawing his long fingers. The restrained, reserved man I loved appeared once again. He gently kneaded my waist, soothingly. I'm sorry, if you felt uncomfortable, I'll stop. I looked at him in bewilderment. Unable to differentiate where I was when drunk, but my tone was adamant. Yes, if you didn't like it. I nestled against Calvin's chest, whispering softly. Calvin, you don't like me. Otherwise, why wouldn't you sleep with me? When I finished, I bit his shoulder in a huff. The muscles beneath his shirt tightened suddenly. Calvin's Adam's apple bobbed as he clamped down with more force on the flesh of my waist. Until I pleaded for mercy and softened my body, he coaxed, I do like you, Joy, that's why both of our hearts are racing. As a man always precise in his actions, he opened the car door and skillfully placed me in the back seat. In the car, adorned with minimalist, icy decorations, my strawberry bear and bunny pendant lay where I had left them. Curiosity surged within me. Refusing to back down, face flushed, I pinned him to the car seat. I don't believe you. Gazing into Calvin's eyes, only his smile remained, depths mysterious. In the narrow space set by the car seats, his fingertips caressed my chin. I involuntarily parted my lips. The kiss followed suit. I'm sorry, Joy, you're too lovely. Calvin's kisses were usually restrained. But this time, the kiss was deep, with a hint of irresistible dominance. I weakly called out to him, but he pressed my waist tighter. My protests were in vain. It was only when I felt like I was floating, barely grounded, that Calvin stopped. The light inside the car was dim. I held onto his chest with both hands and took deep breaths. Suddenly, someone knocked on the car window. Excuse me, sir, can we talk? The voice sounded somewhat familiar. Calvin frowned, looking into my eyes for permission. I blinked away the tears left by the kiss and nodded slightly. Before lowering the car window, Calvin pulled my coat up and wrapped me tightly in his arms, concealing any clues. Even then I suddenly realized, he was very warm. The appearance of calm and composure on the surface was just an illusion. Underneath, a fiery heat could devour me. As I was lost in my thoughts, Calvin's voice sounded a bit cold. What is it? Another fresh and polite male voice inquired. I saw you leaving with this lady on stage. May I ask, what is the nature of your relationship? The man beside me had a slight smile playing on his lips, with a pair of slightly moist eyes showing curiosity. His slender and strong fingers casually rested on the partially lowered car window. Realizing his own abruptness, he quickly added, It's necessary for the safety of the patrons in the establishment. Due to my delayed auditory nerves, I only caught the general idea. I stared at the man for a few seconds. It turned out to be the male model I had been eyeing at the bar. A male model doing security? I tilted my head slightly and looked at Calvin. Feeling a bit bolder, I grabbed his sleeve and playfully teased him. He looks a lot like you. The other half of the sentence remained unspoken as I was interrupted. Calvin didn't respond. Instead, he just touched my ear. The car's air conditioning made the temperature low, and the cold air made my skin feel icy. He enveloped me perfectly. After doing all this, he slowly raised his eyes and said, I am her legal husband. From my obscured angle, the smile at the corner of the male model's lips faded a bit as he scrutinized the serious man before him. What a shame, the man's voice was particularly clear in the dark night. Despite the evening breeze muffling the sound, the deliberate hint of provocation was evident. Hope we can meet in another place next time. The fragmented memories continued late into the night. I just remember having a few drinks, then being unresistingly led away by Calvin, who came to fetch me. When I woke up again, I found myself lying in the familiar bedroom. My head still felt heavy. I was half sober, not fully awake. The numbers on my phone indicated that it was now early morning. Normally at this time, if there were no classes the next day, Calvin would be in his study handling business. As I pulled back the covers, got out of bed, intending to pour myself a glass of water, I noticed that my clothes had been changed to comfortable pajamas. Except for a few lingering blush marks on my wrists and neck, everything seemed normal. I tiptoed out of the room. This was definitely not because I couldn't face Calvin after my drunken antics. The lights were dim inside the house. The star-shaped night light illuminated a small area, revealing a glass of water on a table a few steps away. Calvin must have prepared it in case I got thirsty in the middle of the night and couldn't find a glass. But to reach the table, I had to pass by Calvin's study. I hesitated and glanced at the slightly ajar door. A warm yellow light seeped out. Upon listening closely in the silent night, occasional subdued sounds could be heard. Due to the limited view and the obstructing bookshelves, the scene inside the room was unclear. Only the light cast shadows on the wall. The trembling silhouette revealed a strange yet rhythmic movement. Finally, a repressed sigh broke the silence. I instinctively covered my mouth, holding my breath. A blush spread across my face as a scandalous thought crossed my mind. Why sneak around? In my tipsy state, my thoughts wandered. I imagined all possibilities, from Calvin being reluctantly married to me to not liking me at all. The more I thought, the more uncertain I became. So, when Calvin opened the door, he saw a teary-eyed me. I was quite despondent. Calvin, I've made up my mind. 3 seconds later, tears rolled down like beads. Let's get a divorce. Calvin fell silent for a moment. The secretive and intimate atmosphere in the study was shattered by these words. He held my wrist and asked softly, "Is it because of him?" But to my ears, it sounded like he was referring to her. I incredulously covered my mouth. So it was a love triangle after all. I sobbed. I've decided to let you go. Lost in my own thoughts, I didn't realize Calvin was the one he meant. I broke down in tears. I can't have you. As I was still lost in my thoughts, Calvin's gaze darkened. And if I say no? The grip on my wrist relaxed for a moment before he scooped me up horizontally. My vision spun as Calvin carried me to the desk. The pile of documents on the desk was swept aside. The sound of the papers hitting the floor brought him back from the slight loss of control. Calvin closed his eyes. I could sense the arm around my waist tightening, forcing me closer. Joy, I disagree. Since we met, Calvin had always been a gentle gentleman in my eyes. This seemed to be the first time he showed unmasked pressure. And a hint of fierceness. Unaware, I pressed my hands against Calvin's chest. After confirming I heard correctly, I stared at him in shock. Why? His hand had unknowingly moved to the back of my neck, gently stroking it. It felt like comforting a nervous cat. But upon closer inspection, it was a very possessive gesture. Almost trapping me in his embrace, leaving me with no escape route. Calvin lowered his eyes, his fingers lightly pinching my chin to stop my overthinking. Because I won't let go. Suddenly, my heartbeat raced. Just as I tried to look away, his hand at the back of my head applied pressure. My lips were captured in a heated kiss. The entwined shadows seemed neck and neck. The strange and clear words I had exchanged with Sandy at the bar echoed in my mind. Outspokenness could lead to trouble. Calvin's breath was hot against my ear, his irritating whispers lingering. You're being very obedient right now. I took a gasp and, feeling lost, raised my tear-moistened eyes. Calvin. Before I could finish, he gently bit my lower lip with restrained passion. His voice was low, sending shivers down my spine. What's wrong? The tie around my neck felt tight. I struggled to move my wrists, feeling tired and thirsty. When I spoke, it came out with a heavy sense of grievance. I want water. Calvin paused, a muffled chuckle emanating from his chest. He spoke suggestively, "Joy, you cried too hard." As dawn slowly approached, a faint light from the east seeped through. Calvin finally managed to coax Joy back to sleep. The person who had been tormented all night by him still had traces of tears at the corners of her eyes, cheeks flushed with a hint of moisture. When Calvin saw her at the bar that night, he almost stopped breathing. Joy was slightly drunk, her lips rosy and half-opened eyes looking at him. As soon as she recognized him, she relaxed her guard. She snuggled up in his arms, asking if her heartbeat was too fast. But it was really him. It felt like a fire burning inside him, making his heart race. Calvin knew better than anyone that he was the first one to fall for Joy. He carefully held his feelings, afraid of scaring her away. Their first meeting wasn't what Joy thought of as a blind date. After Calvin started working at the school, the elderly lady at home suddenly started worrying about his future. She urged him, convincingly, that a man loses his taste after 30, so he should settle down while still taking care of himself. Calvin couldn't stop the lady from being enthusiastic about blind dates, but he also didn't want to dampen her spirits, so, on the way to the school in the morning, he would always take a slightly longer route to pick the lady up and take her to the park. The day they met Joy, the downtown was busy with traffic. At a crossroads, the countdown for the green light had started. Suddenly, a skinny stray cat dashed out from the flower bed beside. Unaware of the impending danger, it stood helplessly on the zebra crossing. Calvin's pupils shrank, his fingers instantly on the car door. In that split second, a nimble figure ran swiftly. She hurriedly picked up the stray cat, tucked it into her coat. Just as the pedestrian light lit up, she passed Calvin's car. Softly scolding the cat, she said, "Kitty, even if cats have 9 lives, you can't stand in the middle of the road like this. I'll take you to find your home." Sunbeams filtered through the clouds, casting golden edges on the girl's dancing hair. Her laughter was sweet and innocent. Every time he thought back, it felt like a slow-motion replay. So when Calvin saw Joy at the coffee shop, he thought he was ready. They should take it slow, so as not to offend Joy, he thought. Calvin sat down under Joy's wary gaze, but instead of a casual greeting, his words came out as, "Hello, when can we get married?" Joy didn't respond, her eyes wide with curiosity turning into confusion. She probably thought he was a lunatic. Calvin froze, his brain seemingly stopped working. His heart throbbed painfully in his chest because, "You are my ideal." In other words, he had fallen in love with her at first sight. Realizing this, a faint smile tugged at Calvin's lips. But it quickly vanished. Because it seemed like he had messed everything up that night. "I must have really drunk a lot of water that night. When I woke up the next day, my eyelids were swollen dramatically, with a tinge of redness in the corners, looking pitiful. But because I had drunk so much, the fragmented memories couldn't help me piece everything together. I could vaguely remember that I must have said something to upset Calvin, and he ended up using the tie I gave him to teach me a lesson, making sure I remembered that a tie had more than one purpose. Darn it, is that how gifts are supposed to be used? I got up, holding my aching waist, and angrily stuffed the mischievous tie deep into the wardrobe. I didn't want to see it for a while. After doing this, I noticed the living room was quiet. The breakfast on the warm kitchen table indicated that he must have left for an important meeting, as he mentioned. I thought to myself that he must have made breakfast for me and then rushed to the school. I dismissed the idea of messaging Calvin and instead found Sandy's contact in my recent calls. I hesitantly told her that Calvin was great, really great. "Me, I have a friend." "Sandy, you have friends I don't know?" "There should be some distance between people." I pondered on how to explain the misunderstanding to Calvin. In the following days, we strangely never crossed paths. He would return home after I fell asleep and leave early before I woke up. I had tried waiting for him, but the person who always did everything perfectly always managed to sneak back home when I was too tired to stay awake, fast asleep. If it wasn't for the perfectly prepared breakfast that would appear in the kitchen every morning, I would have doubted if there was a second person living in the house. Calvin still reminded me in messages to sleep early, not to drink coffee on an empty stomach, to brush my teeth after eating sweets. And finally added casually, to call him when needed. I looked at those words with a mix of emotions, silently cursing the elusive good-for-nothing guy. Who needs who? Once again, citing post-marital disharmony as an excuse, I invited Sandy to a bar. This time, I learned my lesson and carefully avoided alcohol, sticking to non-alcoholic fruit juice. You mean Calvin is avoiding you? Sandy raised her eyebrows in surprise, a gossipy flame burning in her eyes. He treasures you more than anything. Holding my water glass with a rather dejected tone, I reluctantly explained to Sandy that I had mentioned a separation to him, and he seemed very upset. I briefly summarized that night's events. Joy's expression changed several times. I looked at her eagerly, hoping for some wise advice from the emotional expert. Sandy sighed deeply, pondering for a moment. The current situation is that Calvin thinks you want to divorce him. Avoiding you is just to steer clear of that issue. I sipped on my straw, ears perked up, as if listening to a scholar highlight key points. Sandy continued, looking past me. I turned around and saw him, with dark hair and black pupils, a stud earring twinkling on his left ear. This was a face that stood out in the crowd, memories almost forgotten rushing back. I gulped down the juice, hurriedly waving him off. Honestly declining, I can't handle alcohol, don't sell me anything, I'm no male model, and looking like Calvin doesn't cut it either. His peach blossom eyes were like charged with electricity, showing a hint of surprise but no sign of defeat. Then he sat down naturally beside me. He blinked at me. You misunderstood, this is a legitimate bar. Sometimes, they also offer some special services, like emotional counseling, while also defending themselves. I wasn't intentionally eavesdropping, I just happened to overhear some things. Sandy, lost in thought, glanced at Mike, not saying a word to stop him. I also slowly caught on. Money is hard to come by these days, and being a male model isn't easy, you have to take on some side gigs in between shifts. Since having more people brainstorm ideas can be helpful, I humbly asked him for advice. Mike leaned on his cheek, casually asking, "Are you two not getting along?" I shook my head, then nodded uncertainly. Half and half. Half under the bed, half on the bed, that's not a wrong answer, Mike smirked, his voice trailing off like a slow, subtle hook, enunciating slowly. Even I can't help but be intrigued by you. It's hard to believe some people don't cherish that. It wasn't overly flirtatious, but rather a fresh and inviting scent. Any normal person would think the focus of those two sentences was the first one. But I, known for my defensiveness, gave Sandy sympathetic eyes for being unaware. As expected, I bit my lip lightly, gradually becoming serious. I felt that he was somewhat biased in his evaluation of Calvin. Don't say that. We need to solve the problem, not ignite conflicts. Sandy's laughter pierced through the sudden silence in the air. She laughed until tears welled up. All right, let's get back on track and discuss solutions directly, she said. The awkward silence grew and fermented in the silence. I felt my face getting warm. Mike casually changed the subject. Since there are misunderstandings between you two, why not meet and talk things out directly? If he's not at home, we could meet at the school. I was thrilled by this suggestion and quickly gave a thumbs up. Pulling out my phone, I gestured towards the app page on the screen. Mike raised an eyebrow. You want to add me as a friend? I said straightforwardly, I'll transfer your consulting fee. No, better in cash. I'm afraid of checks. According to Calvin's class schedule, he had a class in the morning the next day. I didn't have class the next day, so it was the perfect time to confront him. But after studying Sandy's secret tips all night, I found myself blushing, unable to sleep, tossing and turning in bed until late at night before finally falling asleep. When the alarm clock rang early in the morning, after a sleepless night, my tiredness almost seemed to blast through the ceiling. I covered my head with the blanket like an ostrich, delaying for a moment before finally struggling to get out of bed. Calvin had prepared breakfast, which was neatly placed on the table. But with a rush to get to school, there was no time to leisurely enjoy it. I munched on a piece of toast, my cheeks stuffed full. As I stuffed the lipstick into my small bag, I hurriedly put on my shoes and left the house on time. It had intermittently rained in the early morning hours. Thin mist filled the position, and the morning temperature was much lower than expected. As soon as I stepped out of the building, the cold wind slapped my face, making me shiver. The sleeveless t-shirt and denim skirt that Sandy highly praised last night were no match for the chilly wind. It was truly pitiful. I chose the most expensive and practical means of transportation, a ride-hailing car. Every brave soul who dared to hail a ride during the morning rush hour had to endure the consequences of a crazy traffic jam. I made my way hurriedly into the classroom, dodging through the crowds, my ankle boots almost sparked. The bustling noise in the classroom momentarily paused, as if someone pressed the pause button. The gazes that fell on me quickly averted. Most likely out of curiosity towards a stranger. I cautiously found an empty seat in the crowded classroom. Just as I had quietly settled into the seat and hadn't even opened my notebook for show, a somewhat familiar, clear and lazy voice burst out into the air. "Hey there, can you move in a bit more? I'm running late, and this is the only empty spot." I thought, can it be just a coincidence? With a bewildered expression on my face, Mike seemed to notice my presence only then. His gaze skimmed over me. His voice carried a hint of reluctance. "Suddenly, it struck me that your husband seems to be the lecturer for this class." Intentionally drawing out his words with a touch of melancholy, he lowered his dark eyes, his eyelashes fluttering violently. "You really don't want to see me, do you?" The bell suddenly rang as he finished speaking. If I continued this confrontation, Calvin would surely notice before my plan to confront him unfolded. I grabbed Mike's sleeve and whispered softly, "Keep your voice down." I quickly glanced at the podium for any signs of trouble. Then I raised my voice, mildly scolding Mike, "Are you still a student? So, modeling is just a part-time job for you? At your age, you should focus more on your studies and not be late for class." Mike fell silent for a moment. "But it seems like you were late too." Calmly and confidently, he spoke, leaving me speechless. I didn't respond, pretending to focus on taking notes. In reality, my attention had shifted to Calvin. Perhaps because he was a teacher, his speech was calm and steady, with a comfortable rhythm and stable emotions. Despite living in a highly electronic age, Calvin still preferred using the chalkboard. As his slender fingers gripped the chalk, his wrist bones drew smooth and sharp lines, with faint blue veins slightly protruding. There was a hint of sensuality blended with the light, seemingly exuding a desire. The way his fingertips gently and lazily wrote on the board, descending and flicking up, I knew clearly that these slender, sharp hands could unleash a surprising power at night. My heart pounded, and my cheeks flushed, feeling quite warm. What used to be a tiny dot of boldness now expanded infinitely. I discreetly sent a message to Calvin under the desk. "Why are you ignoring me? Just because I didn't send one? I feel so guilty for bothering you, but I can't help longing for you." As Calvin's eyes lowered and he casually glanced over, the phone screen lit up. He slightly curled his fingers, pressed against his lips. His previous cold and indifferent attitude inexplicably softened. Seizing the moment, I slowly inputted a more outrageous message. "Calvin, how about skipping class and teaching something you excel at?" Like Mike suddenly leaned in, "Aren't you cold?" With a flick of my wrist, I pressed the send button. The impulsive rush of courage seemed to deflate like a popped balloon. Setting down my phone, I affirmed confidently, "You owe me one, Mike." Mike raised an eyebrow in confusion. I said, "I mean, borrowing your coat." In the spacious classroom, the air conditioning unit was still working hard, blowing cold air directly at Mike and me. Thanks to Mike's reminder, I finally noticed the chilly breeze brushing against my skin. I really should have checked the weather forecast before leaving home. I was trying to calculate how long it would be until the end of the class. Before I could say anything, a warmth spread over my shoulder. It was Mike's oversized coat, covering my shoulder and almost reaching my knees, shielding me from the cold air. The temperature around me quickly rose. Mike casually bit his lip and said, "Put it on. If you catch a cold, Calvin will worry about you." I immediately felt relieved. The 19°C room temperature would make anyone admit defeat. But maybe staying in the air-conditioned room too long had built up a sudden sneeze. The sneeze was loud enough to make Calvin stop his lecture. He calmly said, "Could the students sitting on both sides of the aisle please turn off the air conditioning?" Then he glanced up and caught a glimpse of me from afar. For a moment, our eyes met, and I quickly grabbed my notebook, trying to hide myself. But I was still caught in the act. Calvin frowned slightly and looked at Mike beside me, his expression showing a hint of coldness. While Mike's dark eyes squinted lazily like a resting cat, his posture was arrogant and laid back, exuding a careless attitude. Whether it was the incomprehensible subject matter or Calvin's hypnotic deep voice, the drowsiness started creeping in. I was struggling to stay awake, my eyelids getting heavier. Despite propping my cheek with my palm, I couldn't stop nodding off before falling completely into sleep. Mike's hand caught my falling head. I had a peaceful nap. When I finally opened my eyes, I found myself on the sofa, covered with a thin blanket. Outside the window, the midday sun shone brightly, illuminating the room's decor. It was Calvin's office. I rubbed my eyes and immediately sat up. My attention was drawn to a glimmering light on the floor. The sparkling light was coming from a metal cufflink that had somehow fallen and rolled under the desk. Due to its extremely hidden position, it had not been noticed immediately. Without much thought, I bent down and reached under the desk. Just as my fingertips were about to reach the cufflink, I heard a click from outside. Calvin was back. I was just a little short, trying to extend my fingers a bit further. But it seemed like fate was against me. As soon as I touched it, the round cufflink slipped away. I was about to speak when someone else, faster than me, called out to Calvin with a familiar tone. It seemed like a colleague from the same department had seen him come back and approached for a chat. If they happened to see me suddenly emerging from under the desk. I quickly weighed the situation, considered myself like air, held my breath, and prayed for them to finish their chat quickly. However, the other person seemed in no hurry to end the conversation and followed Calvin into the office. I grimaced and shrank further inside. Looking up, I saw the black-suited legs stopping right in front of me, followed by the chair being pulled out. Calvin's gaze met mine as he sat down nonchalantly. The cramped space under the desk was not suitable for hiding. With my legs getting sore from squatting, I had to awkwardly stretch my body a bit. In the chaos, I accidentally grabbed Calvin's calf with my hand and hit my chin on his knees. The pain brought tears to my eyes. His hand immediately cupped my face as it slid downwards, gently touching the sore spot. Calvin's fingertips were slightly cold. But the touch on his skin left a warm and tingling sensation. I couldn't help but shrug my shoulders, lower my head, and lightly bite his knuckles. Calvin pulled me out from under the desk. I shakily clung to his neck. He lifted me to sit on the edge of the desk, allowing me to step on his palm, tirelessly massaging my sore calves. I hadn't forgotten my original intent today, so I lightly grabbed Calvin's shirt collar with my fingertips, trying to look fierce. "Why did you avoid me? Because of what I said when I was drunk?" Calvin seemed to find my attempt adorable. Softly, full of affection, he said, "Joy, I'm afraid of hearing those two words from your mouth." I deluded myself into thinking that as long as we didn't meet, that night never happened. I quickly interrupted, "It's because I thought you didn't like me." It took me several deep breaths to suppress the heat creeping up to my ears. "And you wanted to sleep in separate rooms." Calvin paused for a moment, his thumb slowly brushing across my lips. "So, you're not mad at me?" I asked, tilting my head in confusion. The misunderstanding, as clarified by Calvin, was completely different from what I had believed. Even before our blind date, Calvin had heard from my mother about why my ex-boyfriend and I had broken up. My ex thought it was ridiculous that after 3 years of dating, we were still stuck at holding hands and hugging. After our breakup, he quickly moved on to a younger girl. As a result, my mom was determined to find me a perfect man at the blind date in the park. Calvin noted my mother's words and didn't cross any boundaries. He believed proposing to me was bold enough. As for more intimate contact, he wanted to give me enough time to adjust. With the misunderstanding cleared up, I threw myself into Calvin's arms, firmly cupping his cheeks and kissing him passionately. In that moment, it wasn't just his strong and lean body hidden under the suit that tensed up. Calvin's breath also stopped, looking helplessly overwhelmed, unable to resist. When I finally finished kissing him, breathless, it felt like I had fallen into a deep, intoxicating pool of water. Alarm bells rang in my head. I retreated cautiously. The expression in Calvin's eyes was ambiguous. He calmly took off his watch and his fingers curled around the hem of my skirt. "Don't worry, I returned the coat borrowed from someone else. Next time, I'll accompany you to thank him." With those gentle words, he kissed me again tenderly and deeply. "Now, can you repeat the sentence you didn't finish just now?" "Oops, not that one." Calvin wasn't particularly happy with my answer. There was a hint of a smile in his words. "Guess again." "I want to hear you say it yourself." Who would have thought that behind Calvin's elegant and restrained appearance, there's a mischievous streak? His suppressed bad side finally revealed itself to me. On that afternoon, Calvin did his best to teach me a lesson: don't play with fire. When you stir things up, both parties get burnt. They say absence makes the heart grow fonder, but Calvin's attitude towards me was even more affectionate than before. He was considerate in every aspect of life. Sandy exclaimed, "Even dogs are jealous. Let me find someone like that too in my life." Even Mike fell victim to his charm. In the evening at the bar. Right now, there's not a single customer in the bar. Mike frowned at the drink in my hand. "Do you like drinking?" I tightly held onto my glass. Calvin approved of it. Calvin pinched my earlobe lightly. I felt a tingle down my spine and obediently looked at him. "Just one drink." Mike watched Calvin's intimate gesture coldly, not mincing his words. "How much can you drink?" After mistakenly taking Mike for a male model, I realized that this bar was his property. Rich kids always have their ways of squandering. Even when drinking their own alcohol, they don't flinch. Calvin, on the other hand, unusually accepted the challenge. Beneath his gentle and refined demeanor, a rare sense of competitiveness flickered. "Just a little more than you." During the time Calvin was away on business, coincidentally, it was the day of my thesis defense. I was incredibly busy, only able to squeeze in a little time before bed. Calvin in the video had slightly damp black hair. Under the light, the half-open collar of his pajamas exuded a snowy sheen. I swallowed and blurted out, "When are you coming back?" Calvin smirked, and at that moment, his gaze seemed to casually draw closer. I quickly covered my eyes, peeking through my fingers secretly, and said, "I'm not watching, I'm abstaining." He knew my little trick but indulged me. "I'll show you when I get back." I thought I could endure the separation of half a month, but at this moment, the longing felt real. I wanted to touch, I wanted to hug. Only a lover's kiss is the remedy. I called out his name with sweetness and affection. "Calvin." He answered tenderly, "I love you too, Joy."